If I were to guess where you are right now, I would guess that you are sitting either in a room or on some kind of transport, looking at either your computer or your phone. Around you are places to put things and places to store things, and within a minute or two of looking, you could probably find something to eat or drink. I'd also guess that the environment around you feels normal. If that doesn't apply to you, then please leave a comment and let me know where the hell you are. But if that does apply to you, then you are in an inherently unnatural environment. Now, being in an unnatural environment isn't always a bad thing. While I'm sure it would be fitter if I lit a fire every day, primitive technology style, I'm not planning to give up on the time saving and ease of my modern day stove. Nonetheless, I believe that understanding the difference between normal and natural is essential to living a healthier life and in pushing society as a whole in a healthier direction. Because if we live in a world where unhealthy things are normalised, we will be unhealthy ourselves. Or at the very least, we'll have to work very hard, going against the flow, to maintain a level of health. As humans, it's incredibly easy to normalise things, especially things we spend a lot of time around. Cars, 9-to-5 jobs, and mown grass lawns are all things that have become completely normalised in the modern Western world, even though just a few hundred years ago they would have been seen as insanity, let alone a few thousand years ago. And the reason we're able to normalise things so easily is because as a species, we are incredibly adaptable. And nothing shows that more than Edith Eger's book, The Choice, where she describes her experience of being sent to Auschwitz. During her time there, she learnt to adapt to her environment. She learnt to survive, sometimes by avoiding attention and sometimes by getting people's attention. But the thing that really stuck out to me were the very normal moments between the horrific, traumatic events. The prisoners joking and laughing, her sister flirting with a Frenchman, and the amount they talked about food and cooking. In her words, "We talked as though we were heading to market, planning our weekly menu." While I don't think it would ever be possible to truly normalise an experience as terrible as hers, I do think that those small moments of normality show humanity's ability to adapt to even the strangest and most awful situations. And this ability to adapt is something we are all capable of, even in much less severe circumstances. But the thing is, adaptation is about survival, and you don't have to be healthy to survive. So the question is, are you surviving or are you thriving? It is incredibly easy to survive in the modern Western world. While food and drink may seem expensive, it is incredibly cheap compared to almost any other time in history. But the thing is, just because we are surviving doesn't mean we are healthy. And this is partially due to our survival instinct. Think about what a natural human needs to survive: water, food, shelter, and companionship. But just because we have an abundance of those things in the modern world, that doesn't stop us from wanting more. I'll show you what I mean with a couple of examples. In the past, it was much harder to store food for a long period of time. So if you had a large amount of it, let's say some large game like a deer, after a day, maybe two, you would just have to eat it and store it in your body as fat for harder days. And those hard days would come. There would be many days where food was scarce and we would live off of the fat stores from the easier days. In the modern world, we don't really have those harder days anymore. Just days and days of abundant food. And what do we do when we have lots of food? We eat it and store it as fat for the harder days. But we don't really have those harder days anymore. And this concept carries over to shelter too. Our ancestors had to work very hard to even have a temporary amount of warmth, shelter, and protection. But in the modern world, these things are fairly easy to access, and therefore we utilise them to a degree that would be absolutely unimaginable to our prehistoric friends. But you might be thinking, Billy, what are you talking about? Companionship? In what way do we have more companionship now? I don't have any friends. Well, the thing is, you are watching this video right now, and to our stupid monkey brains, watching someone else talk is almost as good as talking to them yourself. Which is why we are happy to spend hours and hours scrolling on social media and watching YouTube videos. And I'm sure you can tell that that isn't really that good for you. We'll talk a little bit more about fake companionship in a minute, but first, here is a message from our sponsor. Me! Yeah, I know that's not how that normally works, but hear me out. I believe that to be healthy, you need 5 things. Healthy movement, a healthy diet, a healthy inner life, a healthy outer life, and a healthy environment. And that's why I made this YouTube channel, so I can share my thoughts and ideas and hopefully help some people. But if you want more, then I also offer online coaching. In the sessions, we'll discuss your life as it currently is and the goals that you want to achieve. And then we'll work together to develop a realistic and sustainable plan to achieve those goals. They can be anything from fitness and diet goals to career or relationship goals, because in the end, they all feed back into being a healthy person. So if you're interested, click the link in the description to find out more or to get started. If you go outside, I know, scary thought, but if you go outside and look around, you might notice something. A huge amount of people, especially young people, will be wearing some kind of headphones. When was the last time you did a mundane task without something on in the background? About 2 years ago, I asked myself the same question, and I realised that I didn't know. It had been so long since I'd gone without background noise that I couldn't even remember it. Let's call this background noise the never-ending stream of content. And this ties into the point I made earlier about false companionship. As humans, we love to listen to other people. We love to gather information. We are insatiable. We just want to suck it all up. I'm sure you can see how this might have some negative impacts on our lives, so I won't go on and on about it. But I will say 2 things. Firstly, if you think you can get your work done just as well with something on in the background, you might be kidding yourself. It is possible, but there is a chance that the quality and quantity of your work is suffering. And secondly, it's good to be bored sometimes. Having boring moments in your life makes the fun moments all the sweeter. Without the comparison between the two, in the end, everything becomes boring. Okay, now I want to talk about how the shift in what we perceive as normal is affecting our ability to understand the world around us. There are many problems in the world of scientific research. The peer review system is so ineffective that we would almost be better off with nothing at all. And scientific journals are so expensive that they are completely outside of the reach of anyone but corporations and universities. And there are a myriad of other issues. But they are not what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about how our baseline has shifted over time and how that impacts research. Let me explain. Essentially, the problem is that we don't have many, if any, humans left on Earth that live in their natural environment, that being nomadic, pre-agricultural hunter-gatherers. And this makes it much harder to understand what the baseline of a natural healthy human actually is. I'll give you an example. Most scientific research agrees that after adulthood, bone density decreases with age. And that's why when young people fall over, they can get back up fine. But when old people fall over, they break a hip. And it looks something like this, with bone density increasing until adulthood, slowly decreasing through middle age, and then dropping off quicker as you get older. So if you wanted to find out how healthy your bone density was, you could go get it checked and then compare it to this average. If it's below the average, then you are less healthy. And if it's above average, then you are more healthy. Right? Well, what if our hunter-gatherer ancestors had a higher bone density than the average person today? Well, we actually have some evidence for that. Bones happen to be one of the few things that remain of prehistoric hunter-gatherers, and research shows that their bones were about 20% denser than ours now, which makes your above average bone density look a little bit less special now. But even this data has its limitations. It showed a 20% higher bone density on average, but what about for older people? Would a 70-year-old hunter-gatherer have a 20% higher bone density than a 70-year-old modern person? What about a 90-year-old? My hypothesis is that due to their anti-sedentary lifestyle, older hunter-gatherers would lose bone density at a much slower rate compared to modern people. But that's just a theory, and without modern day old people that have lived their whole life as a hunter-gatherer, we may never know what the true baseline is. But this goes much further than bone density. We at least have some evidence for that. What about eyesight? We know that being outside in natural light, looking at things closer and further away from us is good for our eyes. But how much better was a hunter-gatherer's eyesight? What about flexibility, muscle mass, strength, endurance, grip strength, and how likely they are to go bald? We have modern day baselines for all of these things, but do they match up with the baselines of our ancestors? Well, the answer is probably no, but it gets harder and harder to know the truth as time goes on, as we stray further and further away from the hunter-gatherer lifestyle into more sedentary ones. In the end, we've normalised things to such a huge degree that we don't even know what natural is anymore. But I'll tell you one thing, it's definitely not a honey, date and oat bar, farmed in Turkey, Mexico and Poland, assembled in China and delivered to your local supermarket.